Steph Curry just had one of those games. 56 points, 12 threes, and a road win against Orlando in a game that the Magic actually had probably their best offensive performance in a couple of months. Paolo was awesome. He had 40. It was a classic game, but this is just another example of what the Warriors now look like with Jimmy Butler in the fold. But I don't want to talk about Jimmy Butler first. We got to talk about Steph first. This was a vintage Steph game. We haven't had a real crazy Steph Curry game, honestly, in a while. Since they won the title a couple years ago, these have been few and far between. Steph hasn't had the crazy 12-point third quarters where he's making, 5 threes in the fourth quarter all of a sudden. He hasn't had those crazy, the other team's only down 2, now they're down 20. Those things that really have been a staple of the Steph Curry experience since the 2015-16 season. We haven't had a lot of those since 2022. A lot of people speculating that he's lost to Steph, maybe that he's tired all the time, he's getting older. Well, he just wanted to remind everybody that he still has that gear. And I think one of the reasons that he does is the addition of Jimmy Butler, because as much as we want to talk about everything that Jimmy does as a scoring threat, taking some of the responsibility off Steph, which I'm certainly going to talk about, Jimmy didn't even have 10 points in this game. Like, this was all about what Steph and Jimmy were able to do with Jimmy as the facilitator. He was screening, he was creating. A lot of this was based off of what he was doing on the ball and allowing Steph to be truly what he should be, which is an on and off ball player. And too often over the last couple of years since the Warriors won the title, the Warriors offense has been structured around trying to get Steph going on the ball. And then when he was off the ball, someone like Draymond Green or Andrew Wiggins, guys that aren't great scoring threats, would have the ball, and teams just weren't that worried about it. So they could focus so much on Steph. Well, now all of a sudden the Warriors have another option in someone like Jimmy Butler, and it allows Steph to be this off-ball spacing problem for opposing defenses, and that is exactly how Steph should always be used. Not to mention the fact that this just keeps him more fresh. He doesn't have to create everything every time down the floor. Over the last couple of seasons, there have certainly been times where it feels like if Steph isn't the one creating the offense himself, the Warriors have not been able to create good offense. And it really starts to become a situation where all this responsibility on Steph starts to wear him down. And that's how you don't get some of these crazy Steph games like the one that we just saw against Orlando. He was having fun. It was a road game that felt like a home game for the Warriors. The crowd was going crazy. And in an awesome game, Steph comes through with 56 points and 12 threes, one off his career high. And it's pretty incredible just how much the vibes around the Warriors have changed since the Butler trade. Because if you go back to before they made the trade, the weeks leading up to the trade, things were pretty much falling apart for Golden State. They had this awesome start to the year, and then after that, they were like 9 games under 500 on the season. They knew that they needed to make a change. The coaching staff didn't really want to make one because they really loved the guys that they had. Steve Kerr talked about how much it meant to him to be losing someone like Andrew Wiggins, but everything is completely flipped for them with Jimmy Butler there. We've talked about the reasons why in the past, the added physicality, the screening, the facilitating, the scoring threat, the free throws. We've talked about all the things that Jimmy Butler's done for them. And again, this is a perfect encapsulation, this game was, of how the cliche of Jimmy Butler can affect the game and impact the game without scoring. It's a cliche, but in Jimmy Butler's case, and specifically in this game, it is absolutely true. And I think there's definitely something to be said with just shaking up a roster and how then getting good results afterwards as a result of it can really change the vibes of a team. And in the Warriors' case, it has changed this team from one that looked like it was going nowhere. There was speculation about a couple years from now, maybe Steph being on a different team, going into a different part of his career, to now all of a sudden, like, this is a team that I'm not trying to tell you the Warriors are going to be favored in a playoff series against Oklahoma City or Denver or some of these other better teams in the Western Conference, but I will tell you that it's not a team that I'd be excited about playing against. Like, when they won the title a couple of years ago, it's not like they were this favored team, this dominant team going through the postseason. They just went on a nice run. They had a nice collection of players. Steph played really well in the finals, and then all of a sudden they won the title. And I'm not saying that's what's going to happen this year, but I am saying it's a much better possibility now than it was a couple of weeks ago, now that they've made the Jimmy Butler trade. And part of that is because you can have some of these kinds of Steph games where, like I said, a team is down 2 and then all of a sudden they're down 20. Steph has 7 threes, and then all of a sudden the game is basically just over. That was a key part of what made the Warriors so fun starting in the 2015-16 range, and we haven't really had that over the last couple of seasons since they won the title. And I'm really curious to see exactly how this continues to develop, because the Warriors have been able to deal with some of the spacing issues between Draymond and Jimmy because of some of the ways that they're screening really well. But then they're still waiting on someone like Jonathan Kuminga to return to the lineup from injury. How he's going to be added back into this team, I think, is going to be extremely interesting. And as I've said in previous videos, I wouldn't be surprised if there was maybe a bit of a smaller role for Kuminga that he would like, because of all the stuff that Jimmy does, and they're a little bit overlapping skill sets. It depends on how well Kuminga shoots the ball when he comes back, how they use him off the bench, because right now this is a team that's rolling, but they obviously want to add Kuminga back in a way that works and makes sense for them. Now, the other part of this is, even though this was an awesome Steph game, they weren't exactly playing awesome in the first half. They were down double digits most of the first half. They didn't come out looking good at all, and especially defensively, they had some issues. Like I said, this was one of the best offensive performances for Orlando over the last couple of months. Paolo had 40. It was an awesome game, but not necessarily a great sign for Golden State. Now, it's one game. It's a place that they play literally once a year. They only go to Orlando once a year. Maybe they didn't take the game super seriously. It's a long travel day. All that stuff makes total sense to me. But as much as I want to praise Steph and praise Jimmy Butler and the changes that they made, they easily could have lost this game. And without this absolutely crazy Steph Curry game, we could be talking about a disappointing loss, although albeit only the second loss for the Warriors since they've added Jimmy Butler. So moving forward for the Warriors now, I want to continue to keep an eye on if we get some more of these kinds of Steph games, because it tells me a couple of things. It tells me that the Jimmy on-ball stuff is working, the screening stuff is working, that Steph is getting in a rhythm, because it's not uncommon for Steph to have middle of the year kind of shooting slumps, or at least slumps by his standards, because the shots that he's taking are so difficult, because he gets so worn down. So if we start to get more and more of these, they're going to get more and more dangerous. And it also tells me that he's fresh and that he's ready to go into the postseason, because there have certainly been times over the last couple years where he just looks completely worn down. I also want to continue to see how they deal with some of the spacing issues, because we could see someone like Buddy Hield's minutes continue to go down, especially as Jonathan Kuminga comes back. That's going to put a lot of pressure on the shooting of Steph. It's going to put a lot of pressure on the shooting of someone like Brandon Pajemski, even someone like Quentin Post, who's been playing really well and has allowed them to do some different things because of his floor spacing. How much is his involvement potentially going to shrink when Kuminga comes back? There's still plenty of questions from a rotation perspective moving forward for Golden State, and I'm sure there are Warriors fans out there that are a little bit nervous about how exactly Steve Kerr is going to handle some of those rotations with Kuminga coming back. If this was just their roster moving forward, I think it would be a little bit simpler, but because Kuminga is so talented and because they maybe had some issues with him in the past in terms of him not being super happy with his role, that to me is still something that could potentially not necessarily ruin what's happening with Golden State. I think we've seen enough to know that this is definitely real, that the Jimmy impact has been so positive for them that it's changed what they could be potentially this season and maybe even next year as well. But when you have things going this well and then you try and reintegrate a player that should be as integral as someone like Jonathan Kuminga, it could potentially be a concern. Orlando knows that firsthand, where they were actually playing okay with one of either Paolo or Franz out, and then since those guys have come back, they've really struggled offensively. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen with Golden State, but Kuminga is certainly a bit of a weird roster fit now, given some of the guys that they're already playing that aren't really floor spacers for them, and then obviously the spacing issues that Kuminga provides. Now, it could be the exact opposite, where him and Butler together are this really strong physical group. They can punish guys in the post, that it improves their rebounding, all that stuff could absolutely be true, and then it gives them another on-ball scoring threat the way that Jimmy has for them. And I think it's already been made pretty clear that Jimmy doesn't really care that much about scoring. He's in a winning situation, he's having a great time, and for right now, he's on his best behavior, so I don't expect Jimmy to be an issue, but I wouldn't be surprised if maybe Kuminga could be one. But the bottom line is, we're back to getting these kinds of Steph games, 56 points, 12 threes on the road. If you watch the game, you know that it sounded like a home game for Golden State, and having these kinds of Steph Curry games back in our lives is always a good thing.